This session will look at how sports have shaped city cultures and how they continue to do so. We have a diverse lineup of panelists who engage with sports in different ways, who I'm happy to introduce. Sohini Chatupathyay is an award-winning investigative journalist and long-form feature writer who won the National Award for Film Criticism at the National Film Awards for 2019. She is currently working on a book on women and athletes in India, for which she received the New India Foundation Fellowship in 2021. Sebastian is a hobby runner and passionate ultimate Frisbee player. He has managed the under-24 ultimate Frisbee team that represented India at the 2018 World Championship in Perth and subsequently coached the Masters team that participated in Japan. He's also founded the Bangalore-based ultimate Frisbee team, Air Traffic Control, and is serving as secretary on the board of the Ultimates National Governing Body, UPAI. Mithila Ramani is a football player from Chennai. Currently, she plays in the Karnataka Women's Super Division for Parikrama FC. She heads operations for Sisters in Sweat, which is a women's sporting community, and aspires to make a difference in women's sport on a large scale. Our moderator is Manuja Veerappa. In her career spanning over 18 years, she has covered a repertoire of sports, including World Cup in cricket and hockey, Commonwealth Games, Champions Trophy, and World Championships in billiards and snooker, among other events. She has written for publications like the Wisden Almanac and contributed to 2 chapters in the book Playback, a collection of life stories of the sports legends of Bangalore. She represented Karnataka in hockey at the national level. Thank you all.
Good afternoon. I hope all of you all had a good lunch. Ishani was recommending the biryani. I hope it lived up to expectations. How sports shapes a city culture is very close to my heart because I'm an out-and-out Bangalorean, born, raised here. I'm an 80s child. So when I think of sport in Bangalore, I studied in Bishop Cotton's. Everybody who didn't know the school till last week know which school that I'm talking about now. For us, inter-school events meant walking down Brigade Road to Sullivan Police Grounds or to Kantirwa Stadium. Playing out, for me, I'm a cantonment girl. In the past, I lived in Cunningham Road. So for me, a Sunday evening meant playing on the steps of Vidhan Sauda, which is totally out of bounds for us now. The 3 panelists here have grown up in 3 different cities. Sohini is grown up in Calcutta, Alex is a Bangalore boy, and Mithila is a Chennai girl. What we bring together here is different facets of how cities and the sporting culture has changed. So we'll be doing a quick, I'll be asking them a few questions and then we throw it open for you all to ask us questions. Okay, I'll start with you, Sohini. You're born, raised in Calcutta, but you've also extensively traveled for your book or otherwise. What do you think is the need for a better utilization of public spaces and how do we go about doing it?
I'm audible, right? Let me start by describing what Calcutta public spaces are like. I don't know if if I'm the right person to give advocacy or suggest what can be better. So Calcutta has a very rich sports history, seen as the home of Eden Gardens, of course, cricket, very, very strong football culture, which was a big part of post-partition refugee narratives in the city, because one of the ways in which, so the 2 very famous clubs in Calcutta, Mohun Bagan and East Bengal, and Mohun Bagan represents West Bengal, pre-partition when Bengal was one. It was West Bengal, and East Bengal, the club represents the people who came from erstwhile East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. So it's a very big part of the city's culture. But two things about it. One is that it's very male. This entire city sports culture is very male. And one of the spaces which is very romanticized about Calcutta is the Maidan, which is again actually, similar to cantonment part of Bangalore because it's a part of the Fort William area. It's part of the oldest colonial part of the city of Calcutta. Many of you know this, but before the British came to Calcutta, it was a set of very small 3 villages called Kolikata, Shutanuti and Govindapur, and it ends, at what is now barely south central Calcutta, so very small thing. So the British came and put Calcutta together as a city. The Maidan is a very, very important part, very romanticized part of Calcutta. Subject of many, we have a culture of sports literature as well, especially football literature. So much of it is set in the Maidan, but all the heroes of these books are men. It's a very male thing. Calcutta also has a very rich swimming culture. And in fact, in the first Olympics where women represented India is 1952. And the 2 disciplines in which women represented India was athletics, track and field, and swimming. And some of you may know this as a quiz question. There was the first Indian woman to swim the English Channel was a Bengali woman, Bula Chandra, right? I think Manuja is a better person she's the professional sports journalist. There's a very interesting Bengali film called Koni, which is unusual because the heroine is a woman. Having said this, so one thing is that it's a very male culture. The other thing I feel, having grown up in Calcutta, is that public spaces are extremely restricted. I see them being locked up in the public parks we have are locked up by 8 o'clock in the morning. Calcutta is in the east, so very early dawn. So by 8 o'clock, public parks are locked up, then again opened up around 4 o'clock, and then again locked by 5:36, so barely enough time for a couple of hours for a walk around the park or something like that. And we were just discussing, Manuja and I were just discussing that this is a very common sentiment that say even my mother would say, what is the point of having public spaces open, because the people will just commit public nuisance, which is like an umbrella term for taking a dump in the park or some sort of what they'll say junkies, drug addiction problems. But to me, this is a sign of, not having a public culture in any way. One obvious thing is, why would people need to take a dump in the park if there are enough public toilets, right? Manuja calls herself the champion of toilets, the champion of washrooms. So she'll have more to say on this. But the reason why that happens is because there aren't enough public toilets in our cities. And the same with the reason why public nuisance would include, lovers having a kiss in the park. So the reason why this happens is, and why this is a problem, is that we don't have a public culture, I feel. So far from, being able to advocate what needs to be, I just think that, public spaces need to be unlocked, need to be accessible. It seems to me that it's very easy to, if you're worried about anti-social activities, it seems to me that it's very easy to, with the technology available, surveil, though I know that has its own problems. But I don't see the point of public spaces being locked up.
So, Bangalore and you've grown up here. How has the spaces changed in the city?
Hello. Hi. So from when I grew up here, I grew up around Alsur and Indranagar. And sports for me while growing up was either in school. I was fortunate enough to go to a school which had a ground. So yes, she doesn't like me because of that. So I either got to play in school, and we got to play a lot of formal sports, informal lunch break, football, cricket, so on. And you go back home, you play on the streets, you play Kings, Lagori, gully cricket, all of that. But as the city has grown now, when I see sporting areas, I don't see kids playing on streets anymore as much as what we used to when we grew up. I think that was the most accessible part for us to play sports, to just step out of your house and play. We always had a ground, a public ground close by where you could go in and play, which also I see is overcrowded now because we don't have enough public grounds. A lot of public grounds are now turned into parks, which is great. I understand the need to create parks to walk, and it's also scenic looking, but it also takes away the space of a sport being played. So you have these parks come up and eat up into all these spaces these days where it's generally set aside just for walking. You're not allowed to run in the parks, and hence runners generally, you see hobby runners, they are on the streets, or they go to Kabam Park to do a run, and you can't run in parks anymore. And the entire space of sports and fitness is now getting cramped up into either going to a gym, or you walk in a park, or you run on the street. The part of a team sport and playing a sport is kind of getting lost in this whole thing. So the need to stay fit is still there amongst people, and hence people are getting into gyms and walks and runs, but they're losing out a very important part of a team sport, which builds a lot of different cognitive abilities, the way you think about team spirit, the way you handle different situations, that kind of gets lost right now, and I feel that is changing in the city. And in terms of other spaces, I feel a lot of new schools coming up within the city where they don't have grounds, and that denies the opportunity for a lot of these kids to play sports when they grow up. And a lot of us keep complaining about video games and mobile phones taking over the entire space when kids need to be outside playing. But more than that, they don't have a space to play right now. We can blame technology, but they don't have a space to go out and play, and that itself is the root of the problem right there.
I completely agree. I don't know how many of this generation actually know what a lagori or what a, what is that thing where you put out, pitch. That's it. So, these are all forgotten games, and I think, breaking a neighbor's glass is restricted to cinema now. I mean, you really don't get to do that in real life at all. Mithila, you're the most you are the active athlete amongst us, and you see two sides of it as an administrator and an athlete. As a young girl growing up in Chennai and taking up a sport like football, I don't mean to, I'm not getting into gender stereotype here, but what was it like? I mean, what is it now?
Hello. No, so I actually agree with your gender stereotype. I was literally subjected to it the day I decided to take up football. My grandmom came to me and said, no, I cannot have you playing football. It's going to cause too many injuries. You're going to have mangled face, you're going to have your knee scraped and all. And I did everything, ended up having that, went back to her and got it stitched. So I agree with the stereotype, it existed. But for me, growing up, I grew up around Ashoknagar, Westmamblam, until I was about 10. And I actually moved to the outskirts near Porur, which is, if you guys know Chennai, it's a little far from the general city. But my entire sporting interest happened fairly early on because of my mother. She just put me and my sister in any sport possible. I swam very early on with YMCA. I played badminton, I played basketball, I played tennis. I just played everything because I found an outlet in sport. Football happened fairly later on when I was about 12 or 13 in fact. And it was just a few boys kicking the ball around, and a few of us saw that and we were like, okay, hey, let's just try it out. It was just me and two of my best friends. We tried it out. It stuck, and by the time we were 15, 2-3 years later, we had our first school girls team. So my school played a huge role in how I saw sport, and I now realize that's a huge privilege because not a lot of schools do that, especially, playing off what Alex just said. My school was blessed with a ground, mostly occupied by the boys, but we had a tiny path that was cut out on the side where we just ended up playing the sport, right? So that was mostly how I started playing football. My coach after that played a huge role as well, because no one's really pushed me to look at playing for state nationals, none of that, until I was in about 16, 17, which for a national level footballer is very late, because most footballers end up getting into the youth system, under 14s, under 15s, under 16s. And when I played my first state for Tamil Nadu, I was 19, which is fairly late. But I think because of the fact that I was generally involved in other sport, picking up football wasn't too much of a deal because of the general physicality of how sport was. But in terms of how the city itself helped, it was the beach. So in Chennai, the beach plays a huge role in how we spend our weekends. And most of my cousins lived very close to the beach. So every weekend, we'd either play football or Frisbee. And that's how sport in the city built for me.
Completely relate to the fact when you say, the scars. So I carry a lot of scars on my leg as a badge of honor, because that's something I think my mom always feared. She said, you come back with stitches and bruises all the time. Gender stereotype that we're talking about. So I'll talk to you about it. Shaping women's citizenship is something that you're very vocal about with relative to sport. How do you see that? How has that changed?
I'm audible, right? Yeah. Shaping. Yeah, I see my book, I see it as a book on women and sport and citizenship. And I think sport and citizenship are very closely linked to each other. The historian Mukul Kesavan has delineated this very clearly. I mean, the example he uses is that the age of high nationalism is the 20th century, and it coincides with the time that most international sporting events or sporting federations were set up. So for instance, in 1896, we have the first edition of the modern Olympics by Pierre de Coubertin. So just on the cusp of the 20th century. FIFA is established in 1904. The International Tennis Federation, I think it is, was set up in 1913. The first international cricket test match between Australia and England is played a little bit before, but 1877. So this is very much, the age of high nationalism is also the age of international sporting events. A number of writers have pointed this out, that sport is war minus the shooting. You see where, it may seem that it's unconnected, but it's actually just the other side of citizenship. Is the other big thing about citizenship, especially in the 20th century, is the women's movement, the suffrage movement, the women's movement to get the vote. Again, that is linked to this war minus the shooting, because men go to war. Now, of course, in the last 5 or 10 years, combat roles are very slowly being opened up to women, but very, very, very slowly. But if you're not going to war, then how do you make a claim on citizenship? Maybe by playing sport, and that is one of the arguments I make in the book. And historically, you see this, say the Olympics, the first edition of the modern Olympics in 1896 had no women participants. There is a legend, I don't know if it's true, but there are a number of sources that there were 2 women. Some sources will say there were 2 women who completed the marathon in 1896. There's a woman called, some sources will say Stomata Revithi, some will say Stamata Revithi. But a woman by that name ran the full marathon
And she had the presence of mind to get people to actually sign a document saying she began the race at this time, at this point. And then when she completed, she also got officials to sign that. The International Olympic Committee, the Hellenic Olympic Committee as it was called, did not accept her. Then there is supposed to be another woman called Melpomene. Some people say, some sources will say it's the same woman. It's Melpomene is the name of a Greek goddess, so it's the same woman. They were not allowed to participate in. And with your permission, I'll just read what Pierre de Coubertin, the said to be Baron Pierre de Coubertin, is supposed to be the founder of the Olympic Games. He was also an educationist. So, I mean, his big contribution to education was sports in schools. Once again, in 1935, he stated, "I personally do not approve of women's participation in public competitions, which does not mean that they must abstain from practicing a great number of sports, provided they do not make a public spectacle of themselves. In the Olympic Games, just as in former tournaments, their primary role should be to crown the victors." In another piece that he wrote, maybe it was a speech that he made about education, he made it particularly clear in his notes in Education Publique, where he stated as a principle that the role of women remains what it has always been. She is above all the man's companion, the future mother of the family, and she must be educated in view of this immutable perspective. Now, what the part that is not mentioned here is the role of women in the modern nation state. Her role as a citizen is her role as a mother and a good wife, facilitating men's participation in actual citizenship and actual rights. So that's the perspective that I'm using. That's the theoretical perspective that I'm using.
I don't know how much of it has changed in modern world. I started working in 2003. When I first entered a sports desk, there were 4 men who were working with a woman for the first time, and they said, "What the hell is she doing here?" The first thing that they had to learn was to mind their language around a woman. And, according to statistics, just 1% of sports journalists are women across the world. And there was a need for them to be inclusive. What I actually did was I started dressing like them. So I wore shirts and jeans and floaters and socks all the time, carried a backpack because I thought I would be one amongst them. Till I did that for 2.5 years, till my senior colleague Prajwal Hegde told me, "Learn to be yourself. You're making a fool out of yourself. They're not going to include you amongst them. You're not going to be a part of the boys' gang just because you dress like them. No." She said, "You stand out, and that's how it is. Accept it, move on." So the reason why I'm saying this is Alex plays a sport, is a promoter of a sport which is mixed gender sport. Frisbee, Ultimate Frisbee is a mixed gender team sport. Alex, it's a relatively new sport in India. When you say mixed gender, you guys also work with especially the lower strata of the society. How difficult is it for a girl from that strata of society to come out, play with the boys, to get acceptance at home, and then, in the society as such?
So yeah, Ultimate Frisbee is a mixed gender sport. So Ultimate Frisbee overall, if I don't know how many of you all have heard of this sport earlier. Just show of hands. Oh, great. Nice. There are quite a few.
That we played as kids, they've just jazzed it up a little bit.
Yeah, we call it Ultimate. So it's up there. So it's played on a full-size football field length. It's quite competitive. There's a lot of running. It's quite intense. Would love to have you all and show you all a session. Moving on, Ultimate Frisbee is quite an inclusive sport in the sense we have players who are 10 years old to up to 50 years old in my team. We've got people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. We've got, it's men and women, it's a mixed sport. So coming to what Manuja asked me, it does get difficult for women to come and play the sport. Initially, when we started off, Ultimate Frisbee was played. We have 7 people on the field at a time, and the ratio when India started playing Ultimate Frisbee competitively about 6-7 years ago, we were playing a ratio of 6:1, so 6 boys and 1 girl, while the rest of the world played 4 men and 3 women. So it took us, and then we allowed kids under the age of 15 to be represented as a women player, because there weren't that many women playing Ultimate. And then all the teams went out, started recruiting women to play, because we put out a rule that next year onwards we're going to play 5:2. And then the year after that we went 4:3. And now it's reached a stage where every point is alternate. You play 4 women, 3 boys, then 4 boys, 3. So it has grown over the past 6-7 years, and which has put the onus on the teams to go and recruit women and get women to play. During that, we've noticed not a lot of women have continued playing sport after school or college. And a lot of our players were post-college, were working people. And then we realized, even though they're working, it's not like they have the independence to make the choice to go and play a sport or to go and play a tournament. So then we had our senior, older players go to their houses, speak to the parents, reassure them that they're going to be safe, we will take care of them, and nothing's going to happen to them, and eventually get their permission. But this used to be, and it still is in some parts, but slowly it is changing. I find that I'm doing that less of it now than what I used to 5 years ago. So that way I see a change happening. It is there, but it's not completely changed. People are still not certain to, I'm not sure if, first, for the woman to think that she can play a sport, because that itself is a mental block. That is first that we need to bring a person, show them how the game is played, reassure them that they can play the sport, introduce the sport to them, get them to play. And second layer, you go to their parents and get them to allow them to participate in tournaments. So, I mean, it is a work in progress, but it's going well now.
It is changing.
It is changing.
Yeah. I mean, when Alex was talking about working women and playing sport, a few years ago, I remember when corporates had events, there used to always be a token representation for women, which used to be throw ball. I really don't know why they did that, but yes, they just thought, throw ball was the most convenient sport women could play. But I think, especially in Bangalore, there is a changing landscape in the way women perceive sport. I think football has brought about that huge change. Mithila, can you talk us through Sisters of Sweat is one place where I've seen, I think women from all kinds of backgrounds, age, there is absolutely, breaking those barriers. How do you see that change?
Yeah, so before just about Sisters in Sweat, how I found Sisters in Sweat itself is a little bit of a story. So I was in my 4th year of college, and that's when I was contemplating whether to continue with engineering or, really scale back and get into sport. Sport is obviously what won. Here I am. So what happened was in Chennai, I'd met one of the co-founders of Sisters in Sweat, Tanvi Hans. So she is a footballer as well. And around then was when I was juggling opportunities on whether I should actually take up working in sport, because it didn't seem profitable at that point. It didn't seem like it would pay you enough or, get you into the industry as a whole, because even, comparing to other industries, it's not as regulated with sport, right? So that's when I found out about Sisters in Sweat. I found out that, there is a community in Bangalore which plays sport, and it's exclusively for women, and the coaches are also women, which was a huge step up for me to find in the first place. So I took a one-way bus ticket and I came to Bangalore saying, hey, I want to experience one of these sessions. I came down and we had only one session a week, which was a Sunday morning football session. So the other co-founder, Shweta, she is a fitness instructor. So how they split the sessions was Shweta did the fitness aspect of it and Tanvi took the football coaching. And I experienced it, and it felt as the coaching and the entire structure of the session was as good as how I'd be playing with my school team, But the women who were a part of it were all working women, people who are mothers, entrepreneurs, homemakers, you name it, women from the ages of 20 to 50 even. Till then, until college, I thought in my head, I'd play football till about 25. I'd take a back seat. I'd probably get into coaching, or I'll get a full-time job. But watching somebody who's 45 play, now I know for a fact that I'll never stop playing football. In those situations, it really breaks barriers which you have constructed for yourself because of conditioning that you've been subjected to all your life, right? So Sister Sweat played a huge role. And the fact that after interning, I found it, so rewarding that I continued and took a full-time position there instead of going on to my master's, which was the initial plan. I was supposed to be in Bangalore for 3 to 6 months and then leave, but I'm here 3 years down.
So I'm so glad you bought that one-way ticket. And I hope you don't buy the return ticket anytime soon.
Yeah, that's the plan. I don't plan on going back. Like I said, I'm never going to stop playing. So in terms of what it represents and what it's grown to be, so when Shweta and Tanvi were building Sisters in Sweat, I was one of the first people to join them as an intern just to see where to take this, because it was a little bit of it was rough around the edges. It was just building. Nobody had any idea what the potential was. All we knew was that women wanted to play. And that broke everything that we used to think that, women don't really want sport. We don't know if they'll come out. But it turns out that the only thing women need to play sport is a little bit of security, assurance, and a safe space. And that's it.
Where did the finances come from?
Yeah. So the way Sister in Sweat works is it's a pay and play program where all you have to do is book a session with us for any sport. We started with football. Right now we have basketball, rugby, badminton. We have swimming programs. And all of these are predominantly led by women as coaches. We have a few male coaches as well. But all the sessions are for women. So at any point, you will find women who are pretty much around the same level as you. We have women who have never kicked a ball before in their entire lives who are playing tournaments right now.
Very encouraging for me.
And that's the case with any sport that we take, right? So in terms of how the program works itself, it is a pay and play program. So you come in, we have about a 90-minute session. It is mixed with fitness and the sport itself. So every session has a breakdown of a little bit of elements of fitness. Then you learn the sport itself, the technical aspects. If it's basketball, it's basketball. We venture into touch rugby as the latest one. Very non-contact form of rugby because we don't want people breaking their collarbones. But touch rugby has been a very exciting new one. In fact, I think a lot of women have taken it up because of how athletic you need to be to do the sport. It's a great workout. And at the end of the day, you're socializing, right? So the social aspect is what's driving a lot of women. They find a sense of sisterhood. They find a sense of community. And that just brings you back because I think, Alex, you mentioned women don't play sport after school or college. That is exactly what most of the women who come to us say, we don't know who to play with. Because most of the women who play are maybe one or two of the women who play in a group of 10 boys. And some women are comfortable with doing that, but not a lot of them are, right? So that is a little bit of the problem that was getting solved. Another thing was to make sport more accessible because you shouldn't have to wake up and travel 25 kilometers just to access sport, right? Just to play for 90 minutes. Because at any point when you wake up, there should be a ground. So that's what what I've noticed is that a lot of boys groups, post-college also, they continue to stay friends, whether they're even corporate, they just book a ground and they all play together. But that extra aspect, that extra nudge is what women needed to find a group. And that's pretty much what Sisters in Sweat does at this point.
Very inspiring. There are some very inspiring women in sports stories in Bangalore, although I cover predominantly men's sport. I'm a champion of women's sport and I can go on. I'll wrap up this women in sport thing with a little story on how, I don't know how many of you all actually know, but a lot of women in their 60s okay, a post, 50, swim in Bangalore. You just have to see their enthusiasm and spirit that they have. That I think 4 of them have swam the English Channel in the last 4 years, and believe me, they're all like 30 years older than me, and they put me to shame. You see them at 5:30 in the morning. I'm looking for the best temperature controlled pool that I can go to and that's at 6:37. And you see these women, in very nice looking swimsuits coming out and saying, "You coming now?" We're like, yes, I woke up some time ago. But then their spirit is so infectious, and I think that's what we as a city, or any city for that matter, needs. Those inspiring figures where, for whom age, gender is not a barrier. I'll move away from women in sport right now. And both Sohini and Alex spoke about running. And I'm sure a lot of you are runners. And I think that's one of the things that COVID actually taught us, emphasis on fitness. Probably, especially when gyms were closed, you started valuing open spaces. But over the years, if you see running or even going for a jog is very restricted as an area-wise. Sohini, can you talk to us about the need for... There is one aspect of saying, yes, every city needs a sporting culture, but who is the sporting culture for? Is it for competitive athletes alone, or you embrace it as a community for a hobby runner? You go first.
Yeah, I'll come to that, Manuja. I know you said you want to wrap up gender and sport, but I just wanted to open up a little bit more. One of the big things I'm grappling with in my book is I have 3 chapters on athletes who are called out for failing sex tests. So this is a very big aspect of, especially track and field. You're the professional sports journalist, so you actually know if this affects women in other sport as well.
Especially in track and field. I just remember 2006 when Shanti Soundararajan
so
failed
Shanti
the gender
is
test.
one of the, failed a sex test. All the language around this is problematic. I'm also grappling with the language. How does one phrase this? Because as one intersex rights activist told me that in gender sex actually is truly a spectrum. We think XX and XY, but there are actually 38 at last count possibilities between XX and XY. And it so happens, because of the nature of sport, one of the primary anxieties in competitive sport is because of the way sports is divided. It's men and women. There's no third category. So the primary anxiety is, what if a man is participating as a woman? So only women athletes are subjected to this so-called sex test. Now the parameters of this keep varying.
Yes.
So in Shanti's time, it was an actual physical test. Shanti is actually the first athlete to be called out for failing a sex test after sex tests became, I'm using this term very, very loosely, and it should be recorded as such, after it became non-mandatory. So in earlier Olympic competitions, or even World Athletics, which is like the other big world championships, World Athletics is the organizing body. It used to be called the International Athletics Associations Federation earlier. There would be actually naked parades of women in the earlier versions of this.
Yes.
Shanti is the first person who failed the test after it became non-mandatory. Non-mandatory means that every woman will not be subjected to it. You have to have a complaint. Then there was Caster Semenya, very famously, the South African athlete.
Pinky?
Pinky she didn't fail. she's also a part of my book, but Pinky didn't fail in competition. Hers is more interesting. Her roommate, her roommate called her out, accused her of rape. So that again opened up that Pandora's box. And most recently there was Duti Chand. The parameters keep changing, because in Duti's time it was, she failed a testosterone level, like her testosterone level was seen as very high. I'm bringing this up because it's so important to sport, this question of who is a woman. And I also wonder, like, some of these women do look a lazy way of saying it would be that they look masculine. And it's a problematic way of saying it, but it is something that comes up often. I wonder how much space our cities, or how comfortable such women feel playing sport. I'm not talking about the Dutis and Shantis who are elite athletes, of course, they are top of the game. But there must be other women, people who may be grappling with gender, sexual identity, how inclusive of our
It's
cities
not only
are.
gender. So when you brought up a very pertinent topic here, it's also racial sensitivity. In 1986, when Margaret Alva was the sports minister, she brought in the Siddhi community into focus, where they had the genetics to make it big. She brought them in here. Kantirwa Stadium became their hub. They couldn't settle in because we as a society didn't allow them to settle in. They were always called out and say, "Hey, you African." I mean, that's how insensitive people were. Within 3 years, that program failed. They all went back to their settlements. And even you look at those athletes, I did a study on where they went after that. Some of them got a railways job. They went in, most of them are now settled around Davangere, Hubli, North Karnataka, which has a settlement of these Siddhi communities. So what do these people do? They have a railways job. Some of them have gone back to farming. And I remember one athlete, Kamala Siddhi, saying, when I told her, your daughters are growing up, don't you want them to come to the city? She said, I don't want them to go through the humiliation I did. She said, we were stronger women then, we were stronger people then. Inclusivity, after all these years, I think it's now in the last 6 months that they've started a project for them. When Sohini spoke about Shanti, and I remember I went to her village 7-8 months out. I think, she failed the test in around September, October, and I was the first journalist to meet her in March. It took me a lot of coaxing for her to talk to me. And one of the first things she said is, I didn't want to talk to the media because one of the headlines said, man or women, ? I believe we as a society fail that gender, or, whether it's racial or a gender. As a society, we should take responsibility for it.
Will now answer your second broad question. So I'm a hobby runner, like many people. You asked me whether I looked for a community. I'm a writer, and I find writing is solitary activity. So I think I look for solitary activities. Running is something which suits my temperament. Sports is not only for elite competitive athletes, right? I think it's for everybody. And I started running in Delhi, which is, I think, the least hospitable city, space, whatever you call it, for women in general. So the way Delhi is, public parks in Delhi tend to be within gated communities. These nice Delhi Development Authority complexes. Or there are a few other, like there's a Safdarjung Deer Park, or there are people in the audience who probably know Delhi better than I do. There are those as well, but it is a very uncomfortable city to run in. People stare, the usual things. People stare at your breasts. People ask you unnecessary questions they will not get out of the way. And I used to remember that some of my male colleagues used to work in a magazine called Open. Then some of my male colleagues would say, we got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to run. Somebody would, and it's just unthinkable for me. Not just in Delhi, actually, to be fair, even in Calcutta, which is much, much friendlier as a city to women. I think it's unthinkable. I'm sure there are people who are braver than me, but I think being a woman, we are trained to think in ways which are very different from men. Moving away from sport, I'm just saying that my men friends, they don't even think once about booking an early morning flight or taking a late night flight out. Whereas I am always thinking about landing in a new city or even in my own city within a respectable time when I wouldn't be putting myself in trouble getting back home. So, and when you experience, one way of experiencing a city is running is a great way. Doing any sport is a great way of experiencing a city and seeing how it relates to women. And the sense I get is some cities are much better. Bombay is much better. Calcutta is much friendlier. But generally, I think the subcontinent as a whole, I wouldn't just say India, I think we are unused to women in public space. We are unused to women in public space.
In a Bangalore perspective, I have a different take. Like you said, it's a lonely pursuit being a writer. I love my time in the morning. I call that my me time, and I explore different spaces, be it Lal Bagh, Cubbon Park. We have some fantastic lakes in Bangalore, and distance for me is not a matter. If I can go around. Most of these places, I find them very inclusive. It also depends on the geographical part of where you are in Bangalore. Central Bangalore, I don't think anybody cares. But South Bangalore, yes, you're in a South, you're wearing your sports bra and a shorts in the morning, you're bound to get those looks and those, Yes, that's South Bangalore. That's South Bangalore. Alex, I see that, you're a lonely figure here. Men, women apart, you're a hobby runner as well. How inclusive do you think is the city for the running community?
Hello. Yeah. From my experience, like you said, I have a very different view because of I've been running in these spaces that you just mentioned, which is more central and towards east of Bangalore. So I've been running in Indranagar. I love running in Defense Colony because it's quiet, there's no traffic. Or I go to Cubbon Park, sometimes I go to Lal Bagh, run across MG Road or around Alsu Lake. So all of these spaces, I find them, I see men and women running constantly, and I haven't noticed any such issues. And what you said, running is a beautiful way to explore a city, especially if you go early hours before the traffic sets in. And Bangalore, especially with its weather, it's amazing to run early mornings. Just continuing in terms of where I think you mentioned traveling for sport and distances, I think that is one of the biggest problems that we have with sport. Like in my club, currently we practice at ITI, Paspia, Kerpuram Bridge, and we have players come in from Jayanagar, HSR, close to Sarjapur, and they travel 20-25 kilometers to reach there by about 6 o'clock in the morning on a weekday. So, and the reason we have to have practice there is because we've been kicked out of Cubbon Park. We are not allowed to run on the grass there. We've been kicked out of HAL grounds. We've been kicked out of GKVK we used to go to, past Jakur. So we just needed space to play, and we were willing to travel any amount of distance, but we've been thrown out of a lot of places. My team, especially in the last 10 years, because we need, like a lot of sports, requires an uninterrupted space. Because for us, a lot of times we're looking at the sky and running, looking at the disc, so we won't see another footballer or a cricketer standing in the way. So a lot of times when you go to a corporation ground, you have 5 cricket matches happening in a space this big, and it's not ultimate Frisbee can't be played in that space. So we keep searching for spaces where we can go and play, or we go to corporation ground at 5:30 in the morning and go mark our cones, so we occupy that space. So while doing all this, we also need to keep in mind that we have kids coming, we have women coming, early mornings. It needs to be a space that is on a main road, not going in deep into an area, into some shady roads. So keeping all of that in mind, we have been thrown out of a lot of places, And I really wish we start taking ground spaces a lot more seriously within city planning so that so sports can flourish.
Before we start taking questions, we'll just talk about this one. Alex spoke about need for space. It's one thing for us to sit back here and talk about we need this, we need that. But how many of us actually stand up and say, let's get together and do this? Whether it is putting out a public petition or talking to the government, we leave it to the so-called administrators, or that that one odd person who's ranting on Twitter, and then you're just retweeting it. And what happens on in the virtual space stays in the virtual space. I'll give you a slight this thing. Like Sohini just mentioned, I'm a champion of washrooms. I'm often singled out by administrators because this is something that we as sports journalists face day in and day out. We have a huge attrition rate among women in sports because there are no washrooms for women in many of the public stadiums. And when I say it's not just for the journalists, if it's there are three scenarios here. It's there, it's not usable, or it's just not there. So there have been multiple, incidents where I remember I was covering a match in Mohali, January. So, you're a woolen ball, you're all wrapped up. And I remember walking up to the watchman and saying, can you open the washroom? And I was the only woman covering the match. And he said, अरे आप तो यहाँ पे क्लब हाउस में हो, कितना दूर है, 20 स्टेप लेके आप जाके आपके रूम में यूज़ करके आइए. He wouldn't say that to the 4 other men who were doing it. And this happened across, every place. And I remember Sharda Ugra once writing to me and saying, I'm so glad you're talking now because, and she said, I'm sorry that, many of us before you didn't speak up. We looked for the most insignificant corner in the press box to go about doing our job. And I did that for a long time where, I won't use, say, a place like Mysore or Hubli, and I cover a lot of the domestic cricket. There was no concept of a washroom for women. I would either take a cab back during lunch to use the washroom in my hotel, or I just won't drink water. Because there was that hesitation of saying, can I ask for a washroom? Where I reached a stage where, we wrote to BCCI, we wrote to KSCA, and not just in thing. And it helped a larger community of people, because I remember police women in Shumaga walking up to me and telling me, Madam, thank you. And I said, why? She said, before they opened up a washroom for you, we didn't have a washroom, and we do 12-hour shifts. They were at the stadium to man the stadium. There was washroom for the male police. There were no washroom for the women police. And recently we were speaking at Nimans, and the DCP of administration, she was telling us about how Bangalore the Karnataka State Police have now introduced portable washrooms for women police. So that's an administrative part of it. I'll start with you, Mithila. How much do you think a public participation of saying, let's go out there, claim our space in a way we want to? What do you think is the need of that now?
I think it's huge. But again, there are a lot of factors that play around why people do it and why people don't. And when it comes down to women, like you pointed out with respect to the restrooms and the cleanliness around that, this isn't something that's just around the cities. It's something that also national athletes face, like you said. So anytime, when we had our first nationals, we were made to stay in the stadiums where close to 2 teams, so that's a squad of 23 in each team. That's 46 to almost, with their coaching staff, everybody, almost 50 people using 2 restrooms. And that was actually normalized, because I was one of the younger members in that squad for that season. And all the other seniors were like, you just have to adjust, just find a way. They always had a jugaad for something. They had, clothing lines to dry their clothes. But, it was something that was so normalized, which is what didn't sit well with me. But right now we are in a situation where that is getting better, and I can speak from the point of football because I played for Karnataka State this last November in the senior nationals. So that was the first time I've stayed in a hotel as a part of the state team, and that was a great experience. And in my head, it was such a huge step up. I was video calling all my family members, saying, look at where I'm staying. This is not even close to where I used to. But now that I think about it, we've normalized something which we should have never.
Alex, as a runner, I mean, especially Cubbon Park, you know where the washroom in Cubbon Park for men or women is by the stink. So your nose just follows the trail and that's the washroom. Then again, yeah, I'm sitting here and I'm talking about it. I've never gone and complained to the authorities. How important is public participation to change the landscape of sport in any city?
Hello. Yeah.
Sorry, you spoke about shrinking playgrounds, making way for parks. You tell me, how much does your, mine, or anybody else sitting here, our involvement mean to making the city or any other city, not just Bangalore, but any other city, a more sporting, healthy city?
So it's a matter of need, right? And right now, I've actually not thought about it. Thanks for putting that thought in my head on actually making a formal move at it or a petition towards it. Because the need for us was a ground, but fortunately, Bangalore as a city in the last 2-3 years has started getting a lot of these turf spaces. It started off with really small 5-a-side turfs, and now we've got full-size football field length. Right in the middle of the city, there's South United near Alsur Lake. You got CSC, Dravid Padukone 1, Tiger 5. There are multiple.
But Alex, let's stop here. That is for athletes, elite athletes. Okay, for you, for me, her, anybody else who wants to just go for a good run, or I want to play badminton, or you can't play on the street anymore. Why am I looking at an organized space? Why can't we have community space? So to get that community space, how much is public participation going to help?
Yeah, I agree. That is for a certain set of people. Even for my team, I can't have my daily practice there. We can't afford it for everyone to pay that kind of money. We can cover for some, but we do it once a week so that everyone gets a good space to play. But for a day-to-day thing, or for someone who's not into a club or doesn't have that access, the public definitely, I don't know how to go about it, to be honest. I would love to talk to you to see how I can go about it. But I think the public needs to put together a petition or come together to be able to make a formal move to reclaim spaces, to ensure not everything gets turned into a park. And even if you make a park, you don't need shrubs and bushes across they can have open spaces to play there as well. But for sure, I would love to, I think the public needs to come together for this, and I would love to see what I can do about it too.
We've just been talking and I realized we're really short of time. We'll take questions now. Please identify yourself and let us know who your question is for. You can raise your hands, please.
Hello, good evening. My name is Raju. I am the promoter of indigenous games actually. So I am into the forum, all the people. So we are talking about the transportation, changing the dimension of the city, the culture and other thing. So way back when Alex was telling me very interesting thing. He told me he was played like say a gully cricket and all those things. So the childhood days was missing. Most of them on the age of almost 45-50 people. So they eager to play with those games also. That's what I want to give to some of the corporates and other things. So my interesting to come to this point is to understand what is your suggestion to improve that space constraint, what we are facing now. And the next challenge is, again, teaching of the old-done games, which is missing. So go to those kind of things to bring back. So bring the glory of my past, my childhood days. So how you are going to suggest us? That's when the forum to the anybody can help us. Thank you.
You take the question because...
Sure, I'll go first. So actually, that is pretty much the problem that we are trying to solve now. And because we spoke about organized spaces, at the moment, we are only using organized spaces. And like Alex pointed out, we can't afford to do the same sport every single day because it is a lot of rent that you have to pay to use these occupied spaces because they maintain the turf. There's a lot of overheads that they have to take care of and all of that, right? So I think the first step is to build the community in itself, to build the culture. Because I can speak in terms of women in sport because they don't feel safe to get with other women to even play. Even if it's 4 or 5 women, they don't feel safe enough in, let's say, a park where you would see close to 20, 25 guys playing cricket. And, you know, there are quite a few around Domlur, Indranagar as well, where you see a lot of, I think even here, I got dropped off near a park. I think I had to, I think you overshot. So the one opposite to one of the institutes over here, right? So I came in and the first thing I saw was a really nice basketball court and a huge mud ground. And the only thing I saw there was close to 35 guys playing cricket. So that is very normal at this point. That's very common. So for women to actually get to the space, I think the first step is to find the safety. So for that, it does require a lot of public involvement in creating that secure, safe space in the first place.
This takes some time to warm up. Okay. You're talking about indigenous sport, right? I think indigenous sport and its promotion has to be community based, and it is something that, see, it doesn't require too much of space. Yes, we need to create awareness about it. Since we have so many public parks right now, you know, even if the local MLA or say, for example, the Putenali Lake, which was redundant and for years now, it is a citizens' initiative that it is being revived. It's been, they having a nice jogging track coming out. That's the difference as citizens, we can make. If they can, either you go to the government with a representation and saying at each park, like a lot of these parks now has those steppers and those twisters and, a lot of these gym equipments. Likewise, why can't a space be earmarked where you can, a closed structure, of course, where you can probably play a carom or the chokabara that, this thing, and there's another one I can't, Ali Uliku, I'm sorry, I'm there. Marbles, yeah. So it is, I think, very community driven to be doing that. So any your thoughts on it?
Community participation, definitely community initiative as well, but I think some amount of organization and taking representations to the government is also important, I think. And one sport which I hear a lot about, one indigenous sport which I hear a lot about recently is Malkham. And I think Maharashtra, for those who may not be aware, Malkham is a form of indigenous gymnastics. Indigenous gymnastics. And I think so certain political parties, certainly the political party in power has interest in reviving it, promoting it, putting it forth as a possible Olympic sport. So I guess that sort of organizational energy also helps.
Definitely helps, yeah. We'll take 2 questions and then anything after that we'll take it offline. We'll be happy to speak. So last 2 questions. Please go ahead because Shani there is giving me looks. Shani, I'm not wearing my glasses, so I can't see you clearly either.
I also have been finding it hard to actually take a walk in Bangalore.
Sorry, can you please identify yourself?
Sorry, I'm Radhika. I'm here because she asked me to come. But one point...
Did she promise you biryani?
No, it's just friendship. It's good enough. No, but I think one of the things Ishani and I had actually spoken about is the gym equipment we've been seeing in Bangalore spaces now. We've remarked that we've seen more women use it. So I was just curious to see, where it came from, what sort of administrative change actually led to this. Would maybe be easier for us to talk to them. I think the second question I actually wanted to ask was, is there any possibility of leveraging current open spaces that are private, right? Like gated communities. Playo is an app actually that generally aggregates other spaces for you to be able to use it. And Bangalore is known for very strong resident welfare associations, most of whom would be invested in something like this, I would imagine. So any possibility, has this been broached before, or is it just very tight?
Yeah, so I'll take this. So you're right. There are gated communities which have their own sporting spaces right now, which are coming up a lot. And I've noticed that with respect to tennis and basketball the most, because like Alex pointed out, there are a lot of turfs in across Bangalore which can be leveraged for sports like touch rugby, football, ultimate frisbee, all of which can be played in cleats so that you don't slip on the turf, right? We have been finding that as a problem that we're solving right now, to find places which people find it safe to play sports like basketball, and apartments are a way to go about it. So I do agree, and I think that leveraging residents associations is the best way to promote sport for that particular community of, let's say, anywhere between 200 to 1,000 even, because there are large complexes, especially around Hebbal. I've seen L&T Boulevard and the other side completely, where Sarjapur, Belandur, all of them with a lot of young working professionals as well, who either play sport through their corporate or they play sport through their gated communities, right? So yeah, I think that is a good way to go about it.
I hope that answers your question. We'll take the last question now.
Check. Hi, I'm Chiteshri. My question is to all of you actually on the panel. I remember a couple of years when the Olympics happened, there was a very heartening piece of news that a team had advocated for a change in their uniforms, where the beach volleyball team, I think, wanted more appropriate clothing and it need not be so tight-fitting. And, there's a certain body type that was advertised for having that sort of sport and to cater to the gaze of the sporting event, which was very male. I'm just wondering, for all of you who have worked in sport and taken it to a professional level, how much do you think is the interrelationship that body shaming, like looking at a certain kind of shape, that is the only one that can play sport? Have we normalized it, or do you see it change?
You're the current athlete, you take it, and then Sohini, you go next. Oh, actually, yeah. Alex, you take it. There's so many women who play ultimate frisbee.
Yeah. When it comes to ultimate frisbee, at least when I can speak from that point of view, we have a lot of beginners come in. So these could be people who have played sport before or people who have never played sport. So as a club and as a community, we have tried to make it as inclusive as possible to let anybody come in, and because since ultimate frisbee is a new sport, unlike cricket or football, you have at least seen it somewhere, or you might have played, you might know the rules for it for the other sports. When you come to ultimate frisbee, everyone comes in from point zero, right? If you've played another sport, if you've not played a sport, so at that point, everyone starts from the same place, and there isn't much of, you don't judge a person by their athletic ability at that point. So everyone feels a little safe to come in to play the sport. But one of the points I thought of when you were mentioning how clothing makes a difference, since ultimate is a mixed gender sport, over a period of time, it's kind of become a blind spot on men and women kind of changing at the same place for us. But this came up to us a couple of months back when we were playing a tournament at one of these Bangalore turf sessions. And the organizers, not the organizers, the ground folk who run the place, they came up to us and they said, the women need to go to the changing room to change. And we were like, okay. And then we were like, where's the men's changing room? They're like, that is also there. But then they didn't ask the men to go to the changing room to change. And we made an issue about it. And then they said, we can all change wherever we want. But we said we won't be coming back to rent the space if you're going to divide us by that, or ask all of us to change in the changing rooms, but don't ask only the women to change. But that was solved for us. But we have, as a community, I feel that we haven't thought about it because we constantly see our teammates, everyone's comfortable with each other in that space. But this is something that I noticed a couple of months back.
Body shaming does happen quite a bit. I remember when Sania Mirza came back from her post-pregnancy thing, and she'd actually changed her attire where she started wearing tights and then a skirt on that. So people said, oh, she's trying to hide flab. How the hell does that matter? She looks fit. She's winning your matches. The same thing happened with Deepika Pallikal recently, where they said, she looks so unfit to be playing. Really? Sorry to say, I mean, I cover cricket. How fit does Rohit Sharma look? He's still scoring your double centuries. So you still have Deepika Pallikal, who according to you is looking unfit, but she's still winning championships against women who are half her age. Whereas, it's always, just look at a Rishabh Pant now. I mean, sorry, but he looks all like a Golgappa now, but he's still doing his job on the field. We try, especially in India, it happens where they normalize. And even if you look at it, there was a time when people spoke about Serena Williams. But if you looked at it on social media, it was essentially the subcontinent people who were so conscious about what they, how they looked, how they this thing. And it is a very, society thing. I travel a lot. I've interacted with a lot of women sports journalists from across the world. And believe me, our inhibitions is something that we carry, the load that we carry. There are a lot of clothes I won't wear because I think I'm not going to carry it off because of my body structure. It doesn't bother them because they're very comfortable in their own skin. As a society, we don't allow people to be comfortable in their own skin. A majority of people don't. I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed from within. I know we ran out of time. We're happy to take questions offline there. Yeah, and thank you so much. I think you'll have been very patient audience. Thank you. And thank you, people.